Up next, our interview with Democratic strategist Rodell Mollineau. Rodell Mollineau is a founding partner in Rokk Solutions, a bipartisan public affairs firm here in Washington. And he's a former messaging guru for the top Democrat in the U.S. Senate, Nevada's Harry Reid. Mollineau has a ton of experience working in the trenches of Democratic campaigns, and he joins us now to talk 2016. Rodell, thanks for dropping by the studio.
David, thanks for having me.
So what about Hillary Clinton winning last night? I mean, she's the first woman to lead a major party ticket, and it's an achievement that the Democratic Party can brag about. What about that?
Well, it's historic. It's been a long time coming. Her and her campaign have worked very hard. It wasn't easy, but I don't think it should be easy. She is running to represent more than half of the country, and so the entire country. But she's running to unite, hopefully, this country. I'm proud of what she did as a candidate. I'm also proud of Bernie Sanders too. I thought he ran a very good race. I thought he brought up a lot of issues that Democrats and quite frankly Americans have been thinking, have been feeling, and because of their race and because it was contentious isn't the word, but it was spirited. And I think this is going to make Hillary a better candidate in November.
Why is it such a big deal? I mean, it's kind of a stupid question, but I mean, Hillary Clinton deserves to be the nominee, I think, because she put together a good campaign. Mm-hmm. She had a lot of challenges. She won anyway. Yeah. Why does it matter so much that she's a woman?
You should ask a woman, but in the same way that.
But as a Democrat, what I mean is, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean as a Democrat, it's something that you're proud of, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but like, what is the significance, just given how important women have become in this country professionally in Washington? We've had a female Speaker of the House. I mean, women have proven themselves. Is winning the presidency and leading a major party ticket that big of a deal?
I think it's a huge deal. I mean, look at where Hillary started, or I should say, where women were when Hillary was growing up. Where it was you're a secretary. Maybe you're a teacher or you're a homemaker, and politics, being a lawyer, heading major companies, these were things that were unheard of. A woman's place was in the home and then some other jobs, and to have a woman break every barrier, and it wasn't easy. It certainly wasn't, and I think the one thing about Hillary, which is remarkable, at least for me, is that you've seen it. She's been in the spotlight for 30 years, but you've seen her climb this ladder, taking a couple slips and falls here and there, but she gets to the top and she breaks the ceiling and breaks through the ceiling. And this is momentous for all women and all Americans. There are people growing up right now who see this world as a world where we've had a black president. We're more than likely to have a president who is a woman. And even at the beginning of my lifetime, I'm not exactly sure that was something that I could have envisioned, just because we're where we were at that time, where a lot of Americans couldn't. So, I mean, this is history in the making. And I think that when we're, old and gray, we're going to look back on this as transformative, not only for us, but for the generations before us as well.
How does this rank compared to President Obama? I mean, becoming the first African-American president of the United States, especially given the country's history in relation to African Americans. How does this rank compared to that achievement?
I think it's right up there. Of course, I'm biased, being black myself, and I couldn't have been prouder. I still sometimes, wake up and read or watch what he's done, and I swell personally with pride for what it means. I really can't put it into words. That's why I said before, to maybe ask a woman. All I know is that when Barack Obama first won the nomination and then went on to become the president and then to do some of the things that he has done as president, as a black man and as an American, I couldn't feel prouder for my country, and I feel proud for my race as well.
I promise this is not the only reason I brought you in, but I just want to ask one more question
on
this, because I think it's interesting. President Obama, some people love him, some people hate him, but he's clearly a self-made politician. I mean, he came from nowhere. He came from no political pedigree.
Yep.
He came from no money. And he got himself elected president of the United States, which is no small feat. Hillary Clinton, taking nothing away from her, was first lady, and she has been able to rise in part with the help of her husband, the former president, Bill Clinton. Does it diminish the achievement at all that she is not the same kind of self-made politician that Barack Obama is?
No, not at all. Listen, life is about timing and opportunity. Barack Obama came to us at a time when the economy was in the crapper. We were fighting two wars. Americans felt pretty down about a lot of things, and here came a man who, at the time, what the country wanted was they didn't want a politician. They wanted a visionary. They wanted someone who had a message of hope, who made Americans dream again and hope again, and was also competent. And Barack Obama delivered on all of those things. It's hard to tell. I mean, there are a lot of ifs and buts and what have you. But Barack Obama ran at a time when it was possible for an African American to win. What's to say that had he waited another 4 years? Well, first of all, I think that any Democrat would have won in 2008 just because of where the country was heading and where it had been. I think the American people were tired of Republican control of the White House. So I think that Hillary would have won had she won the nomination, would have won as well. But who's to say that had he not run in 2008 that he would have won in 2016. This is all about the right place and the right time. I think Hillary thought that 2008 was the right place at the right time, but I think circumstances overtook that. And a politician, like you said, who came out of left field that the country wanted and needed at that time. It's just kind of hard to say. I mean, you can even go back to, I think a lot about this with Barack Obama. What would have happened if he had won that first race against Bobby Rush? And he'd been a
really good point.
Yeah, and he'd been a member of the CBC and had more votes under his belt, and maybe took some positions that might have been harder to explain to the American public in a general election. You just don't know.
All right, so now we turn to the general election. It's Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Just for context here, we have, according to all of the recent polling by Gallup and other reputable organizations, two candidates who are among the most unpopular, broadly speaking, with the public ever nominated. In regard to Trump, do Democrats take him seriously?
So you can note my smile.
He's smiling, folks.
This is what I'd say. This is a battle for the leader of the free world. It's a battle for where we're going to take our country, the economic policies that we want enacted, the foreign policies that we want enacted. I don't care if it's Mickey Mouse on the other side. You take this seriously. Now, I think that's different than whether or not I think Donald Trump is going to win, but he got here. And I can think of 10 reasons why he got here and why the Republican Party is broken right now. But he has found him. He's been adept at hitting on certain people's fears and on crafting a message that I think really gets to what some people, not most, not a majority, but what some people in this country are feeling. I think that as Democrats, we need to look at what he did in the Republican primary and learn from it, but I don't necessarily think that because he was so adept at navigating that Republican primary that necessarily translates to a general election.
What do you think, though, might translate when you look at the things that he did that you need to pay attention to if you don't want him to beat Clinton? What do you think rises to the top of things that Democrats have to pay attention to, learn from, and not underestimate?
There's anxiety in this country, and that is where I think Donald Trump has tapped into, except for he's done it in a very, I would say, racist way. He's there's a fear, and let me explain. There are people, and let's just bring this. I don't think a lot of people like to talk about it in this sense, but I will. There are middle-aged to older, mostly white males, but also white women as well, who feel as though this country is moving away from them. As there's them, and there's this rising American electorate. They're seeing that they're not doing as well as they had been doing, or maybe as the past generations have been doing, and they're fearful that that trend is going to change. I think that in politics, there's a there's a philosophy that if someone else is down, that must mean that someone else is up, and you point your finger at that thing, those people in this case, as to saying this is why your lot in life isn't as good as you would as you want it to be. In this case, with Donald Trump, it tends to be brown people, mostly Hispanics, mostly immigrants, and that's not to say that there isn't concern in this country about our immigration problem. It's to say that Donald Trump has taken what could be considered a legitimate concern and turned it on his head and made people very fearful. And I think a lot of it is race-based.
Do you think that Donald Trump is personally a racist, a bigot, or do you think that he's just been willing to stoke the fire to get votes?
It doesn't matter. You could ask the same thing about George Wallace. Whether or not George Wallace believed what he believed about African Americans, he said and he did some very hurtful things, and he stoked entire state to hate an entire race of people for no reason other than the fact that they wanted equal rights, that they wanted to use taxpayer-funded facilities such as colleges to make a better life for them and their families. So whether or not he believed it or not, what he did to this country at that time was hurtful. And it was divisive. And to be quite honest, we're still dealing with it. That to me is the sadness of Donald Trump. I think that Hillary Clinton is going to win in November. We can talk about that in a little bit. But I think that what Donald Trump is doing right now is, sowing seeds of hatred and divisiveness that it's not just going to go away the day after the November election. These are some of the things that he is stoking and some of the things that he is saying. He's not making America great again. He's making America hate again. And it harkens back to some of the struggles that we have had with race in this country throughout the generations. And it's kind of, it's almost in a way kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back with him just being in this race.
Couldn't you argue, in spite of your thoughts on that in some ways Washington is sort of to blame writ large, Republicans, Democrats, the administration in some instances, because people feel, if you look at the Bernie Sanders movement, such that it is, and the Trump support, that there's just such a disaffection with Washington. And look, I'll talk to Republicans, they're going to blame Democrats, and they always have justifiable reasons. I talk to Democrats, and they have justifiable reasons for blaming Republicans. But at the end of the day, hasn't this been a sort of failure on the part of everybody in town to try and make people feel like they're paying attention and trying to make their lives better? I mean, is there any collective responsibility on the part of Washington for what's going on?
Listen, you know me for a long time, and you know that I'm
yes.
I'm pretty straight down the road.
Which is why I wanted you in here.
I've got to tell you, one of my pet peeves over the last year or so has been false equivalencies. I put this at the doorstep of Republicans. I look at Republicans now, and they're racking their head trying to figure out how this happened, how Donald Trump became their nominee. And this is what I would say is, well, I think there are a couple things. One is, and I will give them this, when you do not have the presidency, you're in many ways in the wilderness. Mitch McConnell and John Boehner might be good legislative tacticians, but they're not leaders. And I mean, they're not leaders in the sense that they do not embody the whole Republican Party, and they don't have the sway or the power, or tell you the truth, the inclination to take this party kind of, by the, what have you, and lead it. And over the last 8 years, the Republican Party, I don't want to sound cliched, but it used to stand for something. If you're looking at what the message has come out of the Republican Party for the last 8 years, it's Obamacare is horrible. The economy's in the crapper, even though it's gotten markedly better. Too many brown people in this country. Obama to blame. repeat, repeat, repeat. And just to kind of give you an example, right? There are things that Donald Trump has said and done, and let's just be honest, it's not the race thing, although I know that makes some Republicans uncomfortable. It's that he has co-opted actually, a few populist messages that are really not Republican doctrine or orthodoxy. And Republicans are like, why don't Republican primary voters understand this? Why are they, why when he says, I'll give you an example, I'm going to negotiate with, I'm going to have Medicare negotiate with drug companies, right? It's not a Republican orthodoxy. So Republicans are racking their brain saying, where is this coming from? As Republicans, we don't believe that this is something we should do, but most American people do. One of the reasons why Donald Trump is able to say something like this and have Republicans Republican voters go along with it is that I think that the Republican Party has done a piss poor job over the last 8 years of really bringing their voters along on what it means to be a Republican and what those orthodoxies are and what those principles are and what they stand for. For the last 8 years, it has been, we are against what Obama is for and we are against what Democrats are for. I give a little bit of credit to Paul Ryan for trying to put together some sort of platform to say this is what we as Republicans, conservatives are about. But he's one person. And I think most Republicans, especially most Republicans in Washington, haven't wanted to lead in that sense. It's been easier for them to oppose. And, hey, they've got Congress, both houses. So, in some senses, it worked. But in other senses, they find themselves in a position where Donald Trump is their nominee, and they're going to lose in November because of it, and they're going to lose the Senate.
I got to ask you about this, or my audience, whatever it is, even if it's just my mom, will kill me. The fact that Obama has relied so much on executive action, notwithstanding how Democrats feel, how you feel about Republican obstinacy in for their part not wanting to work with him. But for instance, he said repeatedly about immigration that there are things that he just couldn't do because he's not a king. And then he, at least in one case, went ahead and did it. Doesn't that help create a sense among Republican voters, whatever their opinions are about race and anything else, that if the rules don't apply, maybe we need our own guy who's not going to pay attention to the rules? Because, that's what, in my discussions with Republican voters around the country as I was covering the primary, I would talk to them from the point of view of Republicans. You have always been concerned about the Constitution and rule of law, and Donald Trump is talking about being a very active executive. And a lot of the response that I would get is, you know what? I've been following the rules and been getting kicked around. Maybe it's time I hire my own bodyguard, and he can break the rules, but he'll do it on my behalf.
I don't agree with that in the sense that, I think that it kind of whitewashes history a little bit. I think Obama tried very hard. Now, granted, he started his presidency with the House and with a supermajority in the Senate, and that's that's very unique that you get those kind of numbers in both houses. And even though he instructed at that time Senator Max Baucus to try to work with Olympia Snowe and Chuck Grassley and Susan Collins. And
we're going back to the Gang of Six. Let me get close to the mic here because I got comfortable. So we're talking Olympia Snowe, Chuck Grassley, and Mike Enzi on the Republican side.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you very much.
Orrin Hatch was a part of the original Gang of Seven and bailed.
Yeah, you remember those. I've tried to forget. You remember those times fondly.
It's stuck. Look, when you chase 80-year-old Chuck Grassley through the halls of the Hart Senate office building, and he's faster than you, and you're only 30-something, you just don't forget.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make is that he didn't have to try to work with those Republicans, but he did, and it went nowhere because, listen, in my humble opinion, I think that Senator Mitch McConnell, to a certain extent Boehner, and many others had from the beginning a strategy of we're going to deny as much of this as possible. We're not going to work together because there's no benefit to us working together. And I'm not going to get into whether or not that strategy, I think that's a fact. whether or not that strategy is a good strategy or a bad strategy, they were actively working against his agenda over time in a way that Democrats did not do to George Bush, especially in the first couple of years. And then, you have 9/11, and there was a time of unity before we got into the Iraq War. You could make the case, and I would make the case, that George Bush, as much as people didn't, on my side, didn't like him, as much as they thought there was some illegitimacy to the way that he became president, gave him a lot more rope and a lot more understanding. He passed the education, he passed the economic or the tax cuts with bipartisan support. Barack Obama did not get this. So here we are now, 6 years into his presidency. 6.5 years, and he looks around, he looks at the things that he's done, which I think are transformative and will go down in history as being as transforming this country. But then he looks at all the other things that he wanted to do, and that, John Boehner's like, yeah, there's no way. Mitch McConnell's just sitting there running out the clock. So he starts using the power of the presidency. I don't feel bad for Republicans who had not only 6 years of this administration, but a whole entire 8 years before that to fix some of these immigration problems, which did not happen overnight, to now sit here and cry that he's kind of taken their lunch. One other thing I'll just say about this, and this is more of a congressional versus a I've never worked for the executive branch, but I sometimes see the congressional, the legislative, and specifically Republicans as the bratty younger sibling who keeps poking the older brother, and then all of a sudden the older brother just hauls off and punches him in the mouth, and they go cry to mom, I can't believe the president did that. He's the president of the United States, and you had a job to do and you didn't do it, and so now he's doing it for you, and now you're going to cry about it. So,
which, by the way, has been my message to Republicans who think that if Trump is elected, he'll just show up and ask Paul Ryan what he's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. You don't get elected president of the United States and not have an opinion about how you're going to spend your time. Look, let's get to the general election before my producer starts to give me the hook here. We've got a decent amount of time, but I'll lose it here because we could, as an old Capitol Hill reporter, you and I could go on ad nauseum. Mm-hmm. First of all, nothing is stuck with Trump in the primary. He said all sorts of things that we thought were the end of him. First, do you think that him calling U.S. District Judge Gonzalo Curiel a Mexican, he was born in Indiana, who can't do his job because he's a Mexican, even though he was born in Indiana, does that stick with him, and is that a problem? It's only June. We've got 5 months to go. Mm-hmm. Does it stick? And let's talk about why you think Hillary Clinton wins, given the fact that she's got plenty of flaws of her own. She's not good on the stump. Mm-hmm. She's still dealing with the possibility of being indicted by the federal government for use of a private email server. She's got the Clinton Foundation, where people have, reported, the New York Times and others, about how donations were given while she was at the State Department. And look, I could go on and on and on. They're just, the Clintons aren't. Look, they're politicians. It's not a big deal, but they're not necessarily the cleanest politicians of all time. They certainly don't come to the job the way Obama did, rather unencumbered of ethical scandal. Mm-hmm. So why does she win? How big of a deal are her flaws? And what about the judge flap with Trump?
I think that Donald Trump is a race baiter. You might go as far as to say that he himself is racist, but like I said, I think it's more of the George Wallace model, and I think he's a con man. And I think that those two things are more important than the judge itself and or Trump University. I think there have been a few things that have happened over the last several weeks. Donald Trump won a 16-way race. He was by far the alpha male. You could probably look at things that the other candidates could have done collectively, that the outside forces such as Mitt Romney, Bill Kristol could have done earlier to have stopped Donald Trump, but they didn't do it. He was, I guess, for better or worse, the best that the Republicans could offer, at least in this primary.
Well, nobody took him seriously. I mean, they ignored him until he started winning. Then they belatedly tried to get rid of him. Now, granted, Democrats, as we know already, are not. At least that's one mistake I don't see them making based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's 1 of 17 versus 2. Now we're down to 2 people, and there's stark differences in what they believe. On the actual the judge thing, it is not that. Listen, I think that Donald Trump has given Hispanics in this country, part of the rising American electorate, part of a greater part of the vote share in certain states every single election cycle. He has given them a lot of reasons to vote against to go vote against them. Something like this, though, I think also is going to peel off independents and some of these white voters that he had counted on. But it's not just this. It is once again the divisiveness, the hatred, the race baiting. This is just one proof point among many that we've seen throughout the primary, and I'm sure that we're going to see throughout the general. The Trump University piece. Is it specifically that Trump University that he defrauded some of his students? I think to a certain point, but I think the larger message there is that here's a person that goes around and says, hey, I'm here for the little guy, I'm your average Joe, so on and so forth. No, but he took advantage of regular, average, everyday Americans trying to get ahead to enrich himself, to line his own pockets. And that makes him a con man, and that makes him a phony. And I think that narrative is bigger than Trump University, and I think Trump University is a proof point. Just like me saying that he is a race baiter trying to divide our country along racial lines is bigger than the Mexican judge comment. So I think all of those things kind of go into that frame. Now, your second point.
She's not good. That's my second point. And look, the polls are even Steven right now if you look at the Real Clear Politics average. Yes, Clinton is ahead in most of them by a couple of points, 4 points, but it's still within the margin of error in the Real Clear Politics average. And it's the same for the battleground state polls that we have. Mm-hmm. It's early, but that's where we are. So what about her issues?
First of all, and I think we all quote polls, and I can't dispute anything that you're saying. I'd say that any of these national polls right now are a snapshot in time. There was a point where people thought that Mitt Romney had a decent chance of beating Barack Obama, and he never did. And he lost pretty handily. Let's just be, people forget about that. People forget about that. It was not a close election at all. So a couple things that I would say. The Trump presidency or the bid for the White House is based on a ridiculous premise that the people that I talked about before, middle-aged to older white people who are pissed off about their lot in life, that there are so many of these voters that he is going to be able to win in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, Maine, Iowa. So a couple questions that I would ask. One is, where were they in 2012? Because if there were this many of these voters, they would not have given Barack Obama a second chance. They're not there. They would have had to multiply by 3. While at the same point in time, the rising American electorate of certain immigrant groups, millennials, single women, those numbers continue to grow. So you have to believe that Donald Trump has that there are more people in Athens, Ohio, and Indian Hills, kind of in Cincinnati, where Boehner's from, and those exurbs that are going to come out to vote for him than in Cleveland and Columbus and the Dayton area that would come out to vote for Hillary Clinton. And I don't think that the math is there. So that takes Ohio off the plate. I don't think that Pennsylvania is, even if you take out Philadelphia, and Donald Trump probably, or I shouldn't say probably, but might do okay in some of the suburbs around Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh itself, I think, will continue to be a Democratic country. You have to believe that there are enough votes in between those two, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, for him to win Pennsylvania. There are not those people. You'd have to make these people up out of whole cloth. That takes away Pennsylvania. I'm not even going to get into Michigan and Wisconsin, which I think people just put on a list just because they want to put it on a list. He's not winning either one of those states. I don't see where now I'm not going to sit here and say that he is going to lose in a landslide. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, or fortunately maybe for the Republicans, unfortunately for the country, there are certain states that will always be red. We're not flipping Wyoming. We're not flipping Idaho. We're probably not flipping Texas. There's some states that people are talking about that are on the map, like in Arizona or what have you. Be great if we got it. But I see this election on the same states that we've been looking at elections for the last 3 or so presidential election cycles, and I don't see him flipping any of these states in order to in order to win. So, respect to all of the national polls that are out there right now. This is still about the Electoral College, and I don't see it. And no one has yet to actually put together or show me any sort of math that says that this can happen.
Okay. Before I let you go and actually be productive, I wanted to talk to you about field and data. Yes. It's something that Barack Obama did extremely well. I think Republicans have caught up a lot, but if you look at the outset of this general election, you've got Hillary Clinton, who's got an operation that's up and running and is going to get the job done in as much as it can get done. And you know that Donald Trump has outsourced all of this to the Republican National Committee, and so it's a little bit of a different thing. Look, as somebody who, I didn't mention it, but look, we go back, when it comes to campaigns, we go back to the 2010 Harry Reid reelect. Mm-hmm. I mean, Harry Reid was dead man walking, electorally speaking, so we thought. One, he had the good fortune of running against Sharon Angle, who was a flawed candidate. But two, you guys put together a field and data program in Nevada that was considered the gold standard for what had ever been done in a Senate race to that point. Mm-hmm. I think Rob Portman in 2016 might be giving you a run for your money 6 years later, but it was something that was transferable as a machine to President Obama a couple years later. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, you guys just kicked ass in Washoe County around Reno, which is where Republicans can do well and need to do well if they're going to win. So what does this mean if we're dealing with a presidential election not unlike 2000, 2004, and on through 12? How big of a deal is it that, at least as we understand it so far, Clinton is in better shape operationally than Trump?
Yeah, it's not just operationally. I mean, Democrats have spent a lot of money and time and effort over the last 12 years. I mean, this goes back to 2004, which would probably be the last time that you could make the case that Republicans had some sort of strong field operation, the Karl Rove 72-hour plan and what have you. And from that point in time, we realized that, we are the Democrats are the community organizers, right? We're the shoe leather party, and we weren't going to get outworked in that way. So we got smart. We started spending a lot of money, both at the state level and at the national level, not only through the DNC, but like I said, having a president for the last 8 years helps you with being able to put together that infrastructure. Listen, I think it's really important because I think you need to know not only where your voters are, but I think you need to know how to get at them. And it's not just knocking on doors. It's everything from knocking on doors to the kind of messages that you are talking to people at the door. It's not a one size fits all. It's about engaging other people in communities to get their friends out and start talking about these issues. And I feel very confident. This one organization that I do work for, it's called Working America, community affiliated of the AFL-CIO. They've been in states like Ohio. They're a full-time kind of field program. They are there even when there is not an election. And they're talking to people about their economic anxieties. And, they do a lot of work with white working class voters, which is, once again, going back to the theme of what Donald Trump is going after, so on and so forth. They are talking to people in communities throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania and many other states day to day, even when there isn't an election. And having that kind of infrastructure, I think is important. And I think it's going to give us a leg up. It's not to say that Republicans don't have infrastructure. They seem to spend a lot of money. I think the Koch brothers, with what they are trying to do with AFP, I think as Democrats we need to watch that because they certainly have the money to put together to put together an operation. They just haven't. It just hasn't clicked for them yet, and I'm not exactly sure that it's going to click for them this cycle. So.
One more thing. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that the Republican National Committee's Field and Data program, which I've reported on a lot, is actually up to snuff.
Okay.
How big of a deal is it that Donald Trump, at least according to what he says publicly, doesn't put a lot of stock in what these operations mean for a campaign? In other words, if the guy running, the lady running, isn't willing to rely on it and listen to it and use it, does it matter that you have something that is otherwise really good and up to par?
Yeah, I start with the fact that I think Donald Trump is a megalomaniac, and because of that, I think that kind of skews his views and his thinking on stuff, because he got to where he was by, listen, everyone's a product of their own history, right? And he's gotten to where he's gotten doing things one certain way, and so why stop now? That being said, he has at least shown a few times throughout this campaign of when he's taken some stumbles, that he can correct course, at least not a little bit. I think that he hates to admit when he's wrong. But I will say this, and this is why I don't think that he is going to run this entire campaign just based on him and like Corey Lewandowski and a couple of other people. This is a person who had, well, for a time, a very successful television show on a major network. You think they weren't pouring through data and analytics to figure out the best way to market that show, to figure out who their viewers were and how to get more viewers and what have you? Of course not. He knows exactly what the game is. I think I think that it's easier for him to kind of do, I'm this self-made man and I'm the person that's doing all of this and blah, 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 and what have you. And I think that's ego. But I think that he that he will kind of get along with the with the program. But you're right. He is out. He's outgunned and outstaffed right now, and there's a lot. He has a lot to catch up.
Rodell Mollineau, thanks for coming in and not pulling any punches. We appreciate it.
David, thanks for having me.
And that's it for this edition of Examining Politics. From all of us at the Washington Examiner, thank you so much for joining us. If you like what you heard, you can check us out at podcast1.com, iTunes, WashingtonExaminer.com, and on Twitter @DC Examiner, #ExaminingPolitics. Also, check